10 years ago, Richard Miller left Olivia Johnson in pieces, a black woman discarded, doubted, and dismissed. But she rebuilt herself, brick by brick, far from the whispers that said she only rose by clinging to a richer man's shadow. Tonight, in the glittering ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, Richard took the stage with a smirk that hadn't aged a day. Into the mic, his voice sliced through champagne and chatter. "Olivia used to be my wife, and now she's just living off another man's wallet." The crowd laughed. Her past was weaponized, her dignity punctured by polished malice. In that instant, the years of healing buckled, and the old shame returned. But Richard miscalculated. Everyone looked at her. No one looked at the doors behind her, because in 30 seconds they would open. And when they did, the man stepping through wasn't just a billionaire. He was the reason Richard would never sleep soundly again. Do you think it will change everything? Or crush her once again? And before we continue, where are you watching this video from? Let's share in the comments below. Olivia had not always been the woman standing in that ballroom. Years earlier, she was just a young wife with big dreams of her own. She loved painting. She dreamed of studying art history, of working in museums, of leaving her mark on the world. But Richard had another dream. He wanted to be a lawyer. He wanted prestige, influence, and wealth. So Olivia set hers aside. She took 2 jobs, waiting tables during the day and working nights at a small bookstore. Their apartment was tiny, the wallpaper peeling, the kitchen barely large enough for 2. She stretched every dollar, often skipping meals so Richard could eat. At night, she painted in the corner of their living room, only to pack it all away when he came home. When Richard was accepted into law school, she smiled. She told him, "We'll make it work." What she meant was, "I will carry the weight so you can climb." She believed in him more than she believed in herself. Every shift, every sleepless night, every sacrifice was proof of her devotion, and Richard knew it. But instead of gratitude, he began to see her sacrifices as natural, expected, invisible. In the beginning, Richard promised her everything. "Once I make it, you'll never have to worry again," he said. Olivia held on to those words like they were scripture. She believed their struggle was temporary. She believed their love was forever. But success changed Richard. As his name appeared on firm letterheads and his suits grew sharper, his voice toward her grew colder. The man who once leaned on her now looked down at her. He stopped seeing her as the woman who had carried him through the storm. He started calling her a burden. "Why don't you do more with your life?" he asked, ignoring the fact that she had given hers to build his. "You should be grateful. Without me, you'd have nothing." Each word chipped away at her spirit. She had given him everything, yet he acted as if she gave nothing at all. Their small apartment, once filled with late-night study sessions and whispered encouragement, became a prison of silence and contempt. Olivia realized she was no longer a partner in Richard's world. She was a shadow he resented, even as she kept him standing. The sharpest wounds were not the ones people could see. They were the words Richard whispered day after day, words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're not smart enough. You're not ambitious enough. No one would want you without me." Olivia heard them so often that she began to believe them. His voice became her own inner voice. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the young woman with dreams and talent. She saw the reflection Richard painted for her, small, unworthy, forgettable. He called this honesty. He called it love, but it was poison. It stripped her confidence thread by thread. At first, she fought back. She reminded him of her sacrifices, of her dreams. He would laugh, call her dramatic, and pull her back into silence. Soon, she stopped fighting. She accepted the lies as truth. The Olivia who once dreamed of museums and art was fading. In her place stood a ghost, a woman who lived only to keep Richard satisfied, a woman who feared she would never be enough for anyone. The end came suddenly, but not surprisingly. Richard filed for divorce. For him, it was a step up, a chance to start fresh without the weight he claimed she carried. For Olivia, it was devastation. She left with nothing. No home, no savings, no recognition for the years she had poured into his success. She walked out with only her clothes and a heart that felt like shattered glass. The whispers began almost instantly, at church, at the grocery store, among old friends from school. "Did you hear? Olivia left Richard Miller. She walked away from a white man who made it big." The tone was always the same: disbelief, judgment, quiet condemnation. To them, she was foolish, a black woman giving up her chance at stability, a failure who had ruined her own future. "Her life is over. one voice said. "She'll never recover." Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of their stares. She was no longer Olivia, the dreamer. She was Olivia, the woman who had been left, the woman who had nothing, and for a while she almost believed them. Olivia could have disappeared. Many expected her to, but she refused. With nothing left, she started over from the ground up. She found work as an assistant at a local gallery, sorting paperwork, making coffee, cleaning brushes. It was not glamorous, but it was hers. For the first time in years, she was in a place surrounded by art. At night, she signed up for classes at a community college. She sat in classrooms filled with younger students, her notebooks crammed with sketches and notes. She often felt out of place, but she kept showing up. Each grade, each finished project was a small victory. The scars Richard left were still there. She carried them like heavy stones. His voice echoed in her head whenever she doubted herself, but she learned to push through it. She told herself, "I am more than what he said I was." Her apartment was small, her paychecks thin, but there was a quiet pride in her struggle. She was no longer living in Richard's shadow. She was taking back her life, one fragile, determined step at a time. It was during a charity exhibit that Olivia first saw him, Daniel Carter. His name carried weight in New York, whispered in articles about billion-dollar deals and philanthropic foundations. But that night, he wasn't surrounded by cameras or attention. He was simply walking alone through the gallery, studying the paintings with quiet focus. Their paths crossed by chance. Olivia was helping rearrange a display when Daniel paused beside her. He asked about the piece, not in a patronizing way, but with genuine interest. She explained the artist's technique, her voice hesitant at first. To her surprise, he listened closely, his eyes steady and thoughtful. Most men she had met since Richard looked at her with either pity or condescension. Daniel didn't. He didn't see her as broken or as someone surviving on scraps of another man's story. He looked at her as if her words mattered, as if she mattered. That night they spoke only briefly, but it was enough. For the first time in years, Olivia walked home with a flicker of warmth inside her chest. Someone had seen her, really seen her. Their paths kept crossing. A conversation at one event turned into coffee. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks through the city. With Daniel, Olivia felt no need to pretend. He never asked her to be someone else. He only wanted her to be herself. He encouraged her to return to painting. He bought her brushes, canvases, and a small easel, but more than that, he gave her space. When she doubted, he reminded her of her strength. When she hesitated, he simply said, "Try." His love was not loud. It was not the kind that demanded attention or validation. It was steady. It was safe. It was the kind that wrapped around her quietly, like a blanket on a cold night. Slowly, Olivia began to rediscover herself. She painted again. She finished her degree. She started to dream new dreams. And through it all, Daniel was there. Not as her savior, but as her partner. He did not erase her scars, but he helped her see they were proof she had survived. Years passed, and Olivia's life began to change. What started as small consulting work at the gallery grew into something bigger. She opened her own art advisory firm, helping private collectors and foundations build their collections. Her knowledge, her eye for detail, her patience, all of it made her respected in circles that once felt far out of reach. Articles began to mention her name. Invitations arrived for panels and conferences. She was no longer just surviving. She was building something that belonged entirely to her. Yet even in success, Richard's shadow lingered. At night, when she walked into her office, polished and full of light, she sometimes heard his voice. "You're not smart enough. You're nothing without me." She hated that those words still echoed. She hated that part of her still wondered if he was right. Daniel reminded her of who she truly was. He reminded her of her strength, her worth. But deep inside, the scars of Richard's cruelty still ached. Olivia knew she was no longer the woman he tried to break. Still, she feared that facing him again would bring all the old ghosts back to life. The envelope arrived on a quiet morning. Cream paper, embossed letters. Northgate High School, Class of 2004 reunion. Olivia held it in her hands for a long time. The idea of seeing old classmates was not what unsettled her. It was the certainty that Richard would be there. She could already imagine his smirk, his words dripping with false charm, his talent for twisting stories. That evening, she showed the invitation to Daniel. He read it, then looked at her with the same steady calm he always carried. "If you don't want to go, we won't," he said softly. But if you want to face it, I'll be with you." Olivia stared at the card again. Her heart tightened. For years, she had built her new life brick by brick, but the thought of Richard still made her feel like that powerless girl. Daniel didn't push her. He never did. His words gave her space. The choice was hers, and she knew that choice would mean everything. Days passed, the invitation still sitting on her desk. Olivia avoided it, yet it called to her. Every time she thought of staying home, she saw Richard's face, smug and victorious. She knew exactly what he would say if she didn't show. "She was too afraid to face me. She's hiding." One evening, she stood in front of her mirror. Her reflection looked back at her. Not the ghost Richard had left behind, but the woman she had fought to become. A woman with her own business. A woman with dignity. A woman who had learned to stand tall. "If I don't go," she whispered to herself, "he wins." On the night of the reunion, she chose a sapphire blue dress, simple yet striking. The color made her eyes burn brighter. She slipped it on, straightened her shoulders, and let out a slow breath. When Daniel saw her, his eyes softened with pride. But Olivia didn't dress for him. She dressed for herself. She was ready to walk back into the world that once broke her. This time, she would not break. The chandeliers of this Waldorf Astoria glowed as Olivia stepped inside. For a moment, she paused at the doorway, the weight of 100 eyes turning her way. The hum of conversation shifted, hushed whispers rising like a tide. "She's the one who married Carter. Must be nice to land a billionaire. Gold digger. Always knew she'd play it that way." The words floated just loud enough to sting. She lifted her chin, refusing to let her face betray the rush of heat in her chest. Every step across the marble floor felt heavier than the last, as though she were carrying years of judgment on her back. Some smiled politely, but their eyes told the truth. Curiosity mixed with envy, pity wrapped in suspicion. To them, her success was not her own. It was borrowed. It was bought. Inside, the old fear stirred. The part of her that still heard Richard's voice whispering she was nothing without a man. But Olivia straightened her shoulders, reminding herself, "I am not who I used to be. I belong here, no matter what they think." Just when the pressure threatened to crush her, a voice broke through the noise. "Olivia!" Angela Brooks, her closest friend from childhood, hurried across the room. She didn't hesitate. She wrapped Olivia in a fierce hug, holding on as if to shield her from every stare. "You look incredible," Angela said, her eyes shining. "And don't you dare let them make you feel small. You are stronger than anyone here." The words were a lifeline. For a moment, Olivia could breathe again. Angela had always seen through Richard's charm, had always warned her that love should not feel like chains. During the darkest nights of the divorce, Angela had been the one who answered every call. Olivia squeezed her friend's hand, whispering, "Thank you. I almost didn't come." Angela gave a firm smile. "Of course you did. You came because you're not afraid anymore, and if he tries anything tonight, remember, you don't stand alone." Her friend's presence was a reminder. Olivia was not the isolated girl Richard once tried to break. She had people who believed in her. The reprieve didn't last long. From across the ballroom, Richard appeared, his stride confident, his smile as polished as ever. The crowd seemed to part naturally for him, just as it had years ago. "Olivia," he drawled when he reached her, his pale eyes sweeping her from head to toe. He paused on the sapphire dress, then smirked. "You look decent. Money does wonders, doesn't it?" The words were sharp, coded in charm, but meant to wound. He wanted her to feel small. He wanted their audience to see her as shallow, dependent, artificial. Angela stiffened beside her, ready to speak, but Olivia lifted a hand slightly. She would face him herself. Her heart raced, but her expression stayed calm. She would not let him see the tremor inside. She had prepared for this moment, and she would not let him win in the first exchange. Around them, the whispers rose again. Old classmates leaned closer, eager for the show. Richard thrived on it. This was his stage. Olivia met his gaze, unflinching. "Richard," she said evenly, her tone almost cool, "you haven't changed at all." The words were simple, but the edge in them was unmistakable. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a mirror, turned back on him. For just a flicker, his smile faltered. He hadn't expected that. He had expected her to blush, to stumble, to shrink as she once did. Instead, she stood calm, composed, untouched by his poison. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh as though her remark were nothing more than playful banter. But the look in his eyes gave him away. He was unsettled. Angela's lips curved in a satisfied smile, though she stayed quiet. Olivia didn't need saving, not anymore. Richard leaned a little closer, lowering his voice. "Careful, Olivia. You know I can make or break you in this room." But Olivia didn't flinch. She held his gaze steady as stone. For the first time in years, Richard was the one who felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The clink of a glass echoed through the ballroom. Richard stood at the front, microphone in hand, every eye turning toward him. He thrived on attention, soaking in the spotlight as if it were his birthright. He began with charm, thanking old classmates, recalling light-hearted stories. Laughter rippled, applause followed. But soon his tone shifted. His smile grew sharper, his gaze flicking toward Olivia. "You know," he said, his voice smooth, "some people here built everything from nothing. They worked hard. They earned their success. That's real achievement." He let the words hang before leaning in slightly. "And then there are those who take an easier path, living off someone else's fortune, depending on a man instead of themselves. That's not success. That's survival." The room grew tense. Whispers passed from ear to ear. Olivia felt her stomach twist as the meaning sharpened in every glance that turned her way. Richard had done it. He had turned a reunion into his courtroom, casting himself as the noble lawyer and her as the evidence of failure. Olivia sat frozen, the air heavy with judgment. Everywhere she looked, faces reflected pity, suspicion, even quiet disdain. It was as if the walls themselves whispered the old doubts she had fought so hard to silence. Her heart ached. Memories rushed back, uninvited and sharp. The tiny apartment, the insults whispered late at night, the years of sacrifice erased as though they had never happened. Richard's voice, "You're nothing without me," roared louder in her head than the chatter in the room. And there was more. She felt the weight of something deeper, something she had known all her life. Being a black woman in rooms like this, wealth and power stacked against her meant she had always been judged twice over. For her skin, for her past, for daring to stand among them at all. The whispers confirmed it. "She doesn't belong here. Just a gold digger." Each word pressed down, suffocating her spirit. Olivia's chest tightened, but she stayed rooted in her seat. Her fingers clenched around her glass. She would not give them the tears they wanted, not yet. Richard's voice rose again, smooth and practiced. "Olivia and we had history. We started with nothing side by side. I gave everything I had to my career. She supported me for a while," and he paused, his tone dripping with false nostalgia. The room leaned in, captivated. He painted himself as the self-made man, climbing every rung through grit and talent. His words dripped with humility, but every line was a blade. She had dreams, yes, but fear held her back. She gave up too easily. Some people can't handle the struggle. Some people choose comfort over growth. His eyes flicked toward her, filled with mock concern. The story was poison, crafted carefully to erase her sacrifices, to bury her truth. He wasn't lying outright. He was twisting fragments, bending them until the audience saw her as a fragile shadow, weak, dependent, forgettable. Applause followed, hesitant but real. To them, he was the hero who endured hardship. She was the woman who had taken the easy road. And Olivia sat there, listening to the version of her life rewritten before her eyes, a story that belonged to him, not to her. Applause filled the ballroom, steady and approving. Richard stood tall on the stage, basking in the sound, his smile wide and proud. To the crowd, he was the image of success, the man who had built everything on his own. Olivia sat quietly at her table, her throat tight. Each clap felt like a stone hitting her chest. Her old classmates avoided her gaze, their silence louder than the noise around her. People she had once laughed with, people she had supported in small ways years ago, now turned away. No one spoke up. No one questioned Richard's version of the truth. Their silence was agreement. Their silence made her small. She lowered her eyes to her hands, resting stiffly in her lap. For a moment, she wondered if this was all she would ever be, a woman rewritten by someone else's story. The weight of loneliness pressed in from every side. The room was full, but she had never felt more alone. Richard had won this round, and everyone seemed content to let him. Then, footsteps approached. Olivia looked up to see Michael Davis, an old classmate she barely expected to remember her. He held out a bottle of water, his expression gentle. "I thought you might need this," he said. His voice was quiet but steady. He sat down beside her before she could answer. "I remember," Michael added, You once helped me study for calculus, even when you were working double shifts. You gave me $20 for a concert ticket when I was broke. You were always one of the good ones, Olivia." Her throat tightened again, but this time for a different reason. Gratitude. Relief. Someone remembered. Someone had not been blinded by Richard's charm. "You're not what he says you are," Michael continued. "Anyone who believes him doesn't know the truth." Olivia felt the faintest spark inside her. Small, fragile, but real. In a room that had swallowed her whole, a single voice had reminded her she wasn't invisible. The reprieve didn't last. Richard returned to the microphone, tapping it lightly for attention. The crowd hushed instantly. "Friends," he said with easy confidence, "we've shared successes tonight, but let's be real. Success means nothing without failure first. So let's do something fun. Let's each share our biggest failure on the road to who we are now." The room buzzed with interest. He gestured toward a few friends, prompting them to share light-hearted stories. A failed job interview, a bad investment. Laughter rippled, lessons tied neatly to every stumble. Then his eyes found Olivia. His smile curved, cruel and deliberate. "And of course," he said, his voice cutting clear across the ballroom, "we can't forget the clearest example among us. Olivia Johnson. A bird in a gilded cage. A woman who traded her wings for comfort." The words sliced through her. Gasps, whispers. A low murmur spread across the room. Richard had shifted the game. This was no longer casual humiliation. This was a public execution. Olivia's chest tightened, her breath shallow. Richard's words echoed in the silence, cruel and final. Every face turned toward her, waiting for her to crumble. The room seemed to hold its breath. Her fingers trembled around her glass. She thought about standing, about leaving quietly through the back. No one would blame her if she did. They would nod, whisper, and confirm everything Richard had just said. Too weak, too dependent. A bird that never learned to fly. Her legs felt heavy, almost unwilling to hold her. The old fear crept in, wrapping around her like chains. The same fear Richard had planted years ago. She could already imagine tomorrow's whispers, the pitying tones, the smug looks. The silence pressed harder. She could feel the expectation in the air. They were waiting for the breakdown, waiting to see her shatter just as Richard had promised she would. For a heartbeat, Olivia believed she might. She was seconds away from surrender. Then, the ballroom doors swung open. A figure stepped inside. Daniel Carter. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone shifted the air in the room. The noise of whispers stilled. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People turned, their expressions caught between awe and disbelief. Tall, composed, his gaze calm but commanding, Daniel moved forward with quiet certainty. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, yet every step seemed to demand attention without asking for it. The crowd parted almost instinctively, like water making way for a steady current. For the first time that night, Richard's expression faltered. The smug grin faded as he turned to see what had pulled the spotlight away from him. Olivia's heart steadied. Relief washed over her like oxygen after drowning. Daniel's eyes found hers across the room, steady and warm, and in that single look she felt her world shift back onto solid ground. Daniel crossed the room without hurry, yet with purpose. His eyes never left Olivia until he reached her side. He took her hand in his, warm and firm, grounding her trembling fingers. Without a word, he anchored her. Richard forced a smile as if nothing had unsettled him. "Carter, very good to meet you," he said, his tone reaching for charm. "Or should I say Ashford? I've heard the name often enough." He extended his hand, a gesture meant to show equality. Daniel looked at it briefly, then back at Richard. His face remained unreadable, his tone flat but clear. "An introduction isn't necessary. I know who you are." The refusal to play along landed like a blow. Richard's hand hung in the air a moment too long before he pulled it back, the color rising in his cheeks. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing the imbalance. Daniel turned slightly, positioning himself between Olivia and Richard with a quiet authority. Without raising his voice, he had made it clear who now held the ground. Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm yet cutting. "You stand here and tell stories about failure and success, but you've mistaken both." The room stilled. Every head turned toward him. "My wife is not a woman who lives off anyone. She is a woman who has fought harder than most in this room will ever understand. She built herself back up after being torn down. She carved out a life that is hers, not borrowed, not given." His words landed with weight, each one measured, deliberate. Richard shifted, his confident stance beginning to crack. The murmurs in the crowd started, small at first, then louder, rippling with surprise. Daniel's gaze swept the room, steady and sure. "You call her a bird in a cage, but I see someone who chose to fly again despite everything done to break her wings." Whispers grew into low gasps. The narrative Richard had spun all evening was unraveling. For the first time, classmates looked at him differently. His charm seemed thinner, his story less certain. And Olivia felt the ground tilt, not against her, but finally in her favor. Richard's composure cracked. His voice rose, sharper than before. "You don't know what you're talking about, Carter. You weren't there. You don't know what our marriage was." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. His words cut through the room with precision. "You're right. I wasn't there. But I know what Olivia gave up for you. I know she paid for your bar exam with her grandmother's inheritance. I know she turned down a career at the Art Institute because you told her it would interfere with your dinners and your briefs. I know when you bought your first Porsche, you told her there was nothing left for her master's program." The crowd shifted. A ripple of unease moved across the faces listening. Richard's smirk faltered, his throat tightening as if the walls themselves were closing in. Daniel's tone remained calm, but his words struck like iron. "Your success wasn't built alone. It was built on her sacrifice. Sacrifices you never acknowledged, never repaid, and now try to erase." Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, he had no rebuttal. The silence was louder than any argument he could make. Daniel turned then, his voice softening as his gaze found Olivia. He took her hand once more, steady and warm. "I can defend you," he said quietly, though the room heard every word. "I can tell them who you really are, but only you can define yourself. Only you can take back your voice." His words were not a shield. They were a gift, an invitation. His eyes held hers, steady with belief, filled with something stronger than protection, faith. The silence in the ballroom deepened. Every face watched her, waiting, wondering. Would she crumble, or would she rise? Olivia felt the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders, but for the first time she also felt them lift. Daniel wasn't asking her to hide behind him. He was giving her back her own ground. Her hands stopped trembling. Her chest filled with breath that no longer burned. It was her turn. Olivia stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The murmurs died. The room stilled, every eye fixed on her. Her voice was clear, steady. "My life did not begin with a man, and it certainly did not end when I left one." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before locking on Richard. "It began the day I walked away from Richard Miller." Gasps rippled, but silence quickly followed. No one dared interrupt. "I was told I was nothing, that I was weak, that I wasn't enough, and for years I believed it. But tonight, I need you to hear me. Every step I've taken since leaving him has been mine, my work, my strength, my life." She straightened her shoulders, her chin lifting. "I am not a bird in a cage. I am a woman who chose freedom, and I will never apologize for it." The stillness after her words was absolute. The ballroom had never been so quiet. For a long moment the room was silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. Then a single sound broke it. Angela clapped. Once, twice, her eyes bright with pride. Michael followed, standing a little taller as his hands joined in. The sound spread, cautious at first, then building, rolling across the ballroom like a rising tide. Soon the entire room was on its feet, their applause thunderous, echoing against the gilded walls. It wasn't just noise, it was recognition, respect, release. Olivia stood in the center of it, not hiding, not shrinking. For the first time she felt seen, not through Richard's lens, but as herself. Richard, meanwhile, stood frozen. The smirk had vanished. His eyes darted around, searching for allies, but found only backs turning, faces shifting away. The circle that once fed his ego had dissolved. He was alone, exposed, defeated. The applause grew louder still, not for him, but for the woman he had tried to erase. Olivia had proven something that night. Strength was never about the money in your account or the titles beside your name. It wasn't about the applause of strangers or the image others tried to paint for you. Real strength was something quieter, deeper, the right to live freely, to love without fear, and to claim your own story when someone else tried to erase it. Her journey was not about becoming the wife of a powerful man. It was about rediscovering the woman she had always been. Every scar, every step, every moment of doubt had led her to this truth. No one could define her but herself, and that truth belongs to more than just Olivia. It belongs to anyone who has ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told they were not enough. Your story is still yours. You can rewrite it. You can rise. If Olivia's journey touched your heart, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story of courage, resilience, and love that can change the way we see ourselves and each other.